no question that Sherlock Holmes is the most famous fictional detective of all time. Every fictional detective created since has drawn some inspiration from him. One such detective is none other than Basil of Baker Street. Basil originated in a series of children's books where the title character lived under 221B Baker Street. Basil learned how to be a detective by observing Sherlock Holmes. He even had his tailor make him some clothes similar to Sherlock Holmes. His name was taken from legendary actor Basil Rathbone, who played Sherlock Holmes in 14 movies and on radio. Rathbone had served as narrator for the Mr. Toad segment in the movie The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. After his death, Disney would use an old radio recording of Rathbone as Holmes for The Great Mouse Detective. Most of the original Sherlock Holmes stories are narrated by Holmes's assistant Dr. John H. Watson. The Great Mouse Detective, as well as the books it's based on, is narrated by Basil's own Watson, Dr. David Q. Dawson. In the movie, we see Dr. Dawson bring a young girl named Olivia Flavisham to meet Basil. When Basil first arrives at Baker Street, he doesn't take any notice of his guest. It's only after Dawson asks who is he that Basil stops to take off his politically incorrect disguise and introduce himself. Basil doesn't bother asking who they are or why they're in his flat. In fact, he doesn't take much notice of them. His reaction to Dawson and Olivia indicate that he's used to seeing potential clients in his flat. To Dawson, and by extension the audience, Basil's refusal to listen to Olivia's problem makes him come off as a jerk. He's not doing this to be a jerk. He's in the middle of an important experiment to capture Professor Ratigan. Basil sees Olivia's problem as a distraction to a bigger one. It is in this scene where Basil displays his similarities to Sherlock Holmes. He's a master of disguise. He was able to deduce a lot about Dr. Dawson just by the stitches on his cuff. When he sets his mind to something, he ignores all distractions. And he could be a bit reckless. I mean, what would he have done if Dawson didn't place those pillows in that chair? Would he have shot him? I'm no expert, but I don't believe those pillows would have shielded Dawson. On a side note, Basil isn't the best tenant based on his landlady, Mrs. Judson's reaction. That's another similarity he shares of Sherlock Holmes. After the failure of his experiment, Basil was more interested in moping than he was in listening to Olivia's problem. This shows how different he is to Dawson. Dawson is doing everything he can to help Olivia, while Basil wants nothing to do with her. Basil isn't ignoring her because he's unfeeling. Being a detective, he must get a lot of people wanting his help. Some problems are just bigger than others. And when he finally listens to her problem, he just brushes her off. In Basil's defense, Olivia could have worded her problem better. She tells him that her daddy is gone and that she's all alone. It makes it sound like she simply got lost. Though I admit that Basil could have asked a few questions like, where did you last see your father, or what happened? It's only after learning that her dad was kidnapped by a bat with a peg leg that Basil agrees to help her. That's because the bat, Fidget, is the henchman of Professor Ratigan. Would Basil have agreed to help her if her case wasn't connected to Radigan? That's hard to say, though I think he would have, after learning Olivia's dad was kidnapped. Basil is not only eager to take the case, he wants Dawson to join him. Why would he want Dawson as a companion? Basil states that he figures an old military mouse like Dawson would want some action. Though I think the real reason is that he saw how useful Dawson would be. Dawson was the one who brought Olivia to his attention. He insisted that Basil listen to her. And Dawson was the one who found Fidget's hat when he showed up outside the flat. Basil didn't want Olivia to come along because of how dangerous the case is. It's hard to argue against that, since it would be. In the end, he does allow her to tag along, but he insists that she remains quiet, and he puts Dawson in charge of watching her. For some reason, he has a hard time remembering her last name. He spends the entire movie getting it wrong. Kind of odd that he would get it wrong, considering how intelligent he is. Then again, I get names wrong all the time, so who am I to judge? Like in the books, Basil goes to Sherlock Holmes's flat. He wants to get Toby, a dog used in the Sherlock Holmes novel, The Sign of the Four. He's enlisting the dog's aid in tracking down Fidget, though he runs into some difficulty since Toby wants to obey Olivia and not him. Guess it was a good idea to bring her along. While investigating a toy shop, Olivia gets captured by Fidget. Basil scolds Dawson for not watching her more closely. At one point, Basil even questions whether or not he should have brought Dawson along. Noticing how remorseful Dawson is over what happened, Basil softens his tone and assures him that they'll get her back, thus showing he still values Dawson. It also shows that Basil isn't unfeeling towards other people. Dawson once again proves his worth to Basil by finding a list of items Fidget was getting. Basil is able to use this list to find Radigan's hideout. He and Dawson disguise as a couple of sailors, where they go to a seedy dive bar. Basil shows how experienced he is in disguise, as he does a great job at playing a low-life sailor. He also knew enough to taste his beer after it was offered on the house. Dawson, however, shows how inexperienced he is by acting like himself and drinking the beer without question. Basil makes one huge mistake. He failed to realize that Radigan would know he's coming. This mistake gets Basil and Dawson into the most hardcore death trap ever made. Earlier in the movie, we see Basil mope after his ballistic test fails, meaning he doesn't take failure very well. Basil prides himself on his intelligence, and he hates to be wrong. Once again he mopes around, but this time his moping could get him and Dawson killed. Not to mention that Radigan would succeed in overthrowing the Queen. Dawson gets Basil to snap out of it, and he comes up with a plan to escape. The best decision Basil made was to bring Dawson along on the case. It's no wonder why he wanted Dawson to stay as his companion. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later.